Hey, everybody.
Yeah, we
It's
survived it.
Sunday.
Man,
yeah,
I was fucking thrashed last night.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
That's okay, though.
I said, fuck it. I just got up and left. I said, all right, it's the end of the show. Jenny didn't want to end it. She just kept going, and I'm like, okay, it's the end of the show. So I just got up and says, I'm going. Yeah.
He's so cranky.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a whole series of shirts with your little face just going
Yeah.
like that, and then it'll just say, I'm getting fussy, or I'm getting cranky, or fuck this shit,
Yeah.
or something like that, because you're just like, you never want to do anything.
No.
I mean, the show was pretty long last night. It came out like
Yeah, I didn't
4.5 hours, 4 hours and 45 minutes.
Doesn't really seem like it's that long at the time.
That's what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
it's weird because when we first start doing the show, I guess alcohol kind of makes time more malleable, because when we first start doing the show, it seems like I was like, oh my god, we've only been on for half an hour, we've only been on for an hour. But then by the time we get up to 3-4 hours, I'm like, what? Oh my god, it's like, you know what I mean?
I remember we tried to.
I
when
could
we
go
first
on longer.
started, we tried to condense the show into 1 hour.
I still can't believe we did that for such a long time. I'm like, how did we do that? We must have just never gone off on any
Just
tangents.
solid, packed information.
Or if we did go off on tangents, I took it out.
You ended up being Wikipedia, basically.
Yeah. I guess. Like, some of the shows turned out being funny, but...
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I said, the necrophilia one, like we were talking about last
Well,
night.
you know, at that time, that's what a lot of people were doing. It wasn't free form, and it wasn't, like, long form, and it wasn't live streaming.
True.
There wasn't any money in live streaming. There wasn't live streaming.
Yeah, I mean...
But you make more money live streaming than you do just posting videos.
Yeah.
With ad revenue. There is ad revenue, but...
Well, I think the nice thing, too, about live streaming is that, yeah, you live stream, but then at the end of it, you have a video, too. Like,
and then you get
Then
you get ad revenue off the video.
Tila said we watched Phantom of the Paradise last night and
Yeah.
had a blast with it.
Yeah, what'd you think of that?
Yeah, that's a fun movie, I think.
Yeah.
I like Rocky Horror better, but...
Did you notice the link between Phantom of the Paradise and Rudy Ray Moore? I bet you didn't, because you don't know nothing about guns. That was the same damn fucking gun that Rudy Ray was using in his movies that the Phantom of the Paradise used.
Okay.
It was a locally produced California. That was California's response to the fucking Uzi.
I'm glad you're excited.
Yeah. Yeah. I forgot that thing was
I was
called.
such an asshole.
I think it was like something called like a high standard or something. It was kind of something or other, seeing machine. I don't remember the name of the thing.
I don't know. Whatever.
It was something that only showed up in movies every now and then.
Yeah.
It was well made, but it was just some locally produced California thing.
Okay, so
CNC machine or something.
Let's talk about The Ripper.
Yeah.
This is a new series that Netflix just added. I guess they added it a few weeks ago, because I had a couple of y'all contacted me and said, you know, are you guys going to review it? And I said, of course I'm going to review it, because we did a show about the Yorkshire Ripper, and it's kind of a case that I was always really interested in. I even read a couple books about it, way back in the day, I think when I was living over there. Because I lived there, and it was I kind of got into a thing where I was into a lot of British crime. So this this actually turned out being a really interesting... It's weird because even though we did a show about the case before, you had completely forgotten about any and all details of the crime, because you were watching it. It's only 4 episodes. The 4 episodes are 45, 47 minutes.
Started jumping out at me.
Yeah, I think you kind of remember, but you didn't remember what Peter Sutcliffe looked like. You didn't remember that he had been caught. You didn't remember any of that stuff.
I just remembered. I remembered the case and the situation. That was some UK stuff. So
yeah,
and I didn't find out about that case until in recent times. Had I grown up with that case, of course I would have remembered it.
I think we did. I don't know if we did a whole show dedicated to him, but I think we did a show that was him and one other, maybe Dennis Nilsson or somebody like that. But yeah, this was a case that I was actually pretty familiar with. But one thing that I thought was really cool about this docuseries was that one thing I liked is that they did it in chronological order. You know, so they didn't like jump around and stuff. I also liked that it was a lot more focused on the victims and on the investigation and not so much on Peter Sutcliffe. They didn't even show a picture of Peter Sutcliffe or like talk about him until the last episode, like what they talked about him when he got caught. But they didn't really talk about him like prior to that because in the universe of the docuseries, they didn't know who he was.
He looked like Count Dante.
Yeah, I think you said that last night on the show that he had like the big poofy
More of
hair.
a pussy version of Count Dante though, skinnier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing about this, like one of the most famous things about the case was that there were a lot of false leads that led to the cops like not catching this dude, because the cops, I mean, they only caught him like just because of this crazy lucky fluke. Because this was like a 4 or 5 year period, right? Like 1975 to 1980. And he ended up killing like 13 women. And they found out later that he had attacked some prior to that too that didn't die, but they didn't really know, you know, they weren't really looking for a serial killer at that point. But I do feel like they did like talk to a bunch of, they talked to a bunch of victims that survived. They talked to a bunch of people that had worked on the case. They talked to like a bunch of reporters that had covered the case. So they really got a good, you know, selection of like people that were involved in the shit. And as much as I don't want to, I don't remember how much we went into this when we did a show about it, but I don't really want to like shit on the cops because I know they were kind of like trying to do their best at the time. But I kind of feel like one of the things that failed them in this particular investigation was that, one, they had a perception, which may have been a misperception, that this was a prostitute killer. And I mean, as soon as the first couple of victims, you know, as soon as the first couple of women had been killed, I think they kind of like focused on prostitute killer, and then they just kind of like ran with that, which in a way kind of like shit on the victims a little bit, because some of them they weren't entirely sure if they were prostitutes. And also when they kind of released it to the media, it seemed like the public was just kind of like, what? I'm not a prostitute, so I'm all right. Even though they found out later, which is something that I didn't know, and they went into a little bit on this, was that a couple women, I think it was 3 women, had been attacked prior to the first victim dying, who was Wilma McCann. And they all lived, but they've been hit the same thing. That's, you know, because that was his MO. He would like come up behind you and he'd like hit you with a hammer, and then he would drag you somewhere and stab you. So 3 women had been attacked like that in the area, and none of those 3 women were prostitutes. So I do kind of feel like...
Yeah, the weird thing was the cops didn't believe them.
Yeah, and it's like
weird.
Like I said, no one had been murdered at that point because, you know, that was early, but it's like, you know, hey, some jackhole like came up behind me and like hit me in the fucking head with a hammer, and like they had to go to the hospital and shit like that. It wasn't like it was just some little whatever. So they almost kind of like blew it off. Yeah. And I feel like there was a lot of sort of victim blaming, like I said, because they're like, well, you know, why were you out at night? You know what I mean? The kind of thing like, why are you walking around the streets at night and shit like that? Like, you shouldn't be doing that. You know, so you like deserve it. So there was that
I think you might be reading into it.
Well, no, it's weird because
I think the cops were powerless to do anything about it was part of the problem. Because remember, they said that the fucking the police were in a total shambles because they weren't even really sure who was in charge of the damn police force. At that time, remember?
Yeah.
They had all kinds of organizational problems.
Yeah, it was like city, county.
Right.
You know.
So I think it was more of a thing where the law enforcement really lacked coordination at that particular time. It had to do with a bunch of reorganizations. They reorganized the police force, and they moved dudes that knew the beat well out into the
larger area.
In the larger area, they were trying to take all these little parts of town and kind of homogenize it into one force to cover a large area. And when they did that, they lost the local, they lost all the local talent. In other words, the dudes that knew exactly where they worked, and knew who all the crooks were, knew who all the hookers were. You know what I mean? Those guys ended up moving to a new
Yeah, like a few
bigger
miles
area,
away and like not.
So
yeah.
it was kind of like blinded. It had kind of like blinded the police force, and that was the first thing that went down. You know, having worked in organizations, you know, like military and law enforcement type organizations, I know what that would do. And then there was something about the chain of command. What was it? There was something in do you remember what the detail was? The chief of police was, you couldn't contact him, or they weren't sure who it was, and it was kind of like the force was running on autopilot, like a zombie, kind of like a zombie for a while.
Yeah.
Until they realized that they did have a serial killer on their hands. Then they tried to get their act together, but it was too late. They'd already had 2 women dead and like 3 of them attacked, and they didn't want to count the first 3 for some reason. They didn't really believe it. They didn't really believe it happened.
Yeah.
Which was kind of strange. That's a sign of a fucked up police department. Because when she went to go report that some dude hit her in the head with a hammer, they just looked at her like she had 2 heads. Like, huh?
Yeah.
No, I can't. There's something not right about that. That couldn't have happened. It was like that couldn't have happened.
Or it was like they didn't take it that seriously.
Well, they didn't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
It could be that the organization had no response to that. They just wrote it down, probably. Yeah, you hit in the head and a hammer, but you're alive. What are we gonna do about it?
Right.
We don't know who it was.
Like, you might want to like find the person that did that. Would be you know a big priority. I think
that's what it was. It was a long time ago. He's gone. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
I think it was like that.
It might have been.
Because the type of police that you were talking about in that era, they were the kind of dudes that just walked around and fucking fined people and told people to fucking leave the area and arrested some fucking thugs, or maybe they'll tell some hooker to fucking scram, walk into the fucking bar and fucking break up a fight. They're more like bouncers, you know, and meter maids. They were like a deal like that.
Yeah,
I don't think it was a serious
think
crime fighting unit.
Yeah, they didn't really seem equipped.
Yeah.
To. And the thing, too, is that they didn't have a lot, you know, obviously they didn't have a lot of the forensic shit that they have nowadays. It's like they could do blood typing, they could do that kind of stuff, but everything had to be written down on pieces of paper. Very famously, they had so much information, so many leads and stuff, that they had written all these index cards, that they had to have the floor of the police station, like, what's the word that I'm looking for? They had to have the floor was going to collapse. So they had to have it, like, you know, fortified or whatever. Yeah. Like, because there was so much fucking paperwork that this fucking thing generated. But another kind of thing that put them off the track was the letters. They, like, got all these letters supposedly from, you know, from the killer. And that very famous tape, which supposedly was from the killer. And I'm not entirely sure why. It seems like they pretty much immediately thought these 2 things are legit, which fucked up the investigation like big time, especially that tape, because they thought that was the real killer talking. And they go to this big thing, and they're like, they have this linguist, and he's like, you know, I narrowed it down to this one village, like 1 square mile. And they went and, like, you know, they kind of like investigated all the people in that village and shit like that, you know, because of the dude's accent. But then it turned out when they caught him, and I mean, very famously too, Peter Sutcliffe was interviewed by the cops, like 9 times? Yeah. And because he didn't have that same accent, he didn't sound like that, so they thought, well, it's probably not him.
Yeah, there's British people making comments in the comments section. And I was kind of astounded because they were interviewing one cop. He was talking about that time, and he's like, yeah, it was a rough area. They had a bunch of guys from, like, Jamaica running around, and, you know, they'd smile at you and you'd see gold teeth, you know. They had gold teeth, and boy, you know, you didn't really want to mess with them. And I realized I was going like, man, there's a big difference between British cops and American cops. And I think the biggest difference was they just ran around in pairs. They didn't have guns, you know.
Well, and I think that
from an American perspective, that's not a cop.
A
cop shows up and kills you. That's what an American cop does.
Well, and like I said,
they show up, you give them any shit, they just shoot you.
I think that they weren't real familiar with this area, because there was like such a lot of immigration in the area. Yeah. I also like too the way this documentary, it kind of goes a lot more into what was going on at the time, like all the economic shit that was going on at the time that maybe had spurred some of these women like to have to go out and be prostitutes because, you know, all this, you know, industrial, like the factories had closed and like everyone was out of work and stuff. So they, you know, they didn't go a huge amount into it, but they did give you like a lot of background, and they had like a lot of archival footage from that time. So you could see like how shitty like all of these kind of north of England like neighborhoods were, you know, and like a lot of them were like burned out buildings and shit like that. So they did kind of give you like a lot of really good context. But yeah, I do feel like this case in particular, I think Sheila asked, wasn't this the first case solved by DNA? I don't think it was this one. Shit. And I feel like I know what case that is, but it's not this. They actually solved this one accidentally. He had killed 13 women, I believe. And he was in a car with a woman, like in like an odd place. And I guess they assumed that, oh, it's a dude with a prostitute. So they pulled the guy over. They came up to like check it out. They ran the plates on the car, and the plate and the car didn't match. And then one of the cops that was in the car kind of looked at the driver, and he's like, man, that looks just like that drawing of, you know, the attacker. Because a couple of the victims had lived, and one of them actually did see his face. And he's like, that kind of looks like him. And he just had a feeling. So later on, like, he went back to the spot, because what ended up happening was when he, you know, questioned the guy and the woman that was in the car who was a prostitute, he was like, I have to go pee, or he ran around the corner or whatever. So that cop like went back later on and went around the corner to where that guy had run to pee, supposedly, and he found like a hammer and a knife and all this other kind of shit. And so then they went and arrested him, and basically as soon as they got him in custody, he just confessed to everything. Yeah. So
he could have lawyered up and got out of it. He didn't want to, though.
I kind of feel like at that point,
but he was a big suspect. They'd already had fucking
9 times.
Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous.
9 times. And I think it was mostly because of that tape.
Yeah.
Because they were like, that's not what his voice sounds like. He's a local guy. Because they were kind of operating on the assumption that this guy wasn't local because he had a different accent. So the fact that a lot, you know, that some of the cops like suspected him enough to like keep bringing him in because his name kept popping up.
Yeah.
And there was the whole thing, too, about one of the women that was killed. They found, like, a 5-pound note, like, in a little hidden pocket in her purse. And they think that Peter Sutcliffe remembered, like, after he killed her and left her, he was like, oh, shit, that note could probably be, like, traced back to me. So he went back to the body and tried to find it. Like, he dumped the purse out, but he couldn't find it because it was in, like, this little hidden pocket in the purse. So they found it, and they did actually end up tracing that to, I think, just 3 factories. Like, it had been given to somebody, like, in their pay packet. So that was another thing where they actually went and they interviewed, like, the guy that worked, who was, like, Peter Sutcliffe's supervisor or something. And it's like the cops kept coming and, like, interviewing the dude. They're like, at the place that they worked, they called him the Ripper because they thought it was so funny that the cops kept coming, and it's like, you know, and I don't know if they like actually maybe in the back of their mind thought maybe he is the serial killer, but they're like, they called him that at work.
I think the cops were joking about him being the Ripper too.
The one guy they were talking to was the guy that worked, I think it was his supervisor, like at the factory where he worked, and they said, yeah, we were calling him that.
All right, I thought the cops were calling him that to kind of jokingly.
I think at least one cop, because they did talk.
Because the cops didn't think he did it, but his name kept coming up, and from what I remember, they were like, they thought the dude was a pussy, and that wasn't who they weren't imagining that guy being the killer. Yeah, they were imagining somebody that looked like a killer. Evidently, this dude, you would never suspect him. He was just a quiet guy, you know.
Yeah.
And seemingly normal upbringing.
I mean, he had a wife. He had a job. You know, he wasn't like, but like I said, I think that's maybe, you know, that's better now. But I do feel like when people are looking for a serial killer, I think you still expect him to look like an ogre or some shit like that. You don't expect like just this weedy, normal looking dude. Yeah. That's just like hanging out with, you know, here's his wife and here's his job and shit like that.
He'd go to the pub and women would talk to him, but they'd kind of lose interest in him because he wouldn't talk much. He was real quiet.
Yeah, nobody said he was like, a freak or anything, but they said, oh, he was a little weird because he was just real quiet. That was kind of like that was the only thing that people said was strange about him, was that he was just real quiet and didn't talk much, which isn't really that weird.
He had some kind of weird fantasy going on where he just wanted to hit women with a hammer and stab them.
Yeah, and he didn't
even need sex. He had girlfriends. He had a wife.
And he didn't rape them either, I don't think. He just really got off on hitting them and then like just stabbing the shit out of them and just leaving them. And he liked to leave them.
He'd go back and look at them too.
Yeah, and he went back to some of the sites too. And like, I think because I think at least one of the victims, I can't remember which one, but I think she had like at least one of her breasts cut off.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he did that at the time or if he went back later and did it. So he was actually kind of ballsy because he would leave the bodies. Like, sometimes he would kill them, like, kind of in a secret area, but then he would drag them out, like, closer to the road or, like, lay them out in an alley so that they would be found, like, right away. And sometimes, even after he had done that, like, if the body wasn't found, he would go back and, like, drag it to a place where it was more public, like, more open, because he really wanted them to be found. So it's almost like he was making some weird kind of statement, but I don't know if he ever said, like, what that fucking statement was.
Yeah, and he just didn't... He wasn't what they expected. I mean, he was kind of sharp-dressed, kind of a 70s style. He had his perm and his beard and his little fucking bell-bottoms and his suit coat and his little fucking medallion-like type shit. You know, just like a typical leisure suit 70s looking
Yeah, like I said, you would never think that.
And he was young. And
he didn't even have the crazy eyes like some of the serial killers have.
No. He looked like Count Dante to me, you know. You can look him up. Yeah. Wasn't very big. I don't think he was a very big guy. Kind of skinny.
Yeah, he wasn't like real big or anything like that. Well, you know, it's just so weird to me. And I feel like a lot of like kind of Jack the Ripper type stuff was attributed to him because when they were, you know, investigating the case, like before they caught him, like I said, they got those letters in the mail, and for some reason they just assumed that they were from the killer, but that they weren't. I don't know if they ever caught the person that sent the letters. I know that they caught the person that sent the tape. I don't think it was the same person necessarily. But the letters, basically what the person that wrote the letters did was they took Jack the Ripper's letters from back in the day and then just kind of like rewrote them, but like plugged different words in to make it like relevant to the Yorkshire Ripper case. But yeah, I'd have to look into that. I don't think they mentioned it on the documentary, like if they ever caught. I don't think they mentioned that they caught the person that did the tape either. But I can't remember what the dude's name was. But they did catch him like many years later. They found out who he was, and he was just some dude that thought it would be funny to like send a tape because there's always one or two, you know. Which is why I don't know. It seemed very naive of the cops to automatically assume that these letters and this tape had come from the actual killer, because I don't know, man. I feel like 9 times out of 10 it's just some chuckle fuck like thinking it's a joke. You know what I mean? I'm just pulling that statistic out of my ass. But it does seem like that's very, very common, like especially like a really high profile case like this, that there's always like some chode that's going to be like, hey, it wouldn't be funny if I sent him a tape saying I'm the killer.
Tila and Hernandez are like trying to compare him to other killers like Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez. Did he say Richard Ramirez? No, the Green River Killer. Yeah. No, he wasn't really a guy like Green River Killer or Ted Bundy. He was not as outgoing as Ted Bundy, not as flashy.
He was kind of like a down low serial killer. He was a down low motherfucker. Yeah,
and he wasn't. What was the name of the guy who did the Green River Killer again? What was his name?
Gary Ridgway.
Yeah, Ridgway. Ridgway was a fucking worm. The guy, he was a total maggot. So and this guy wasn't like that either. He was just kind of like a non-entity.
That was one thing that always struck me about Peter Sutcliffe is he just seems like a very bland,
yeah,
individual.
Bland little dude with a fucking perm and a beard. And
I mean, you wouldn't notice he was just kind of quiet.
Yeah,
he had like
sharp.
He was normal.
Yeah, dressed
like
sharp.
He had a normal
didn't talk
life.
Much. He had a wife. Yeah, there was just like nothing remarkable about him. Lack of character. That'd be a good way to put it.
Yeah, it was just really,
like
really
a
weird.
lack of character.
One thing that I thought was funny, and I saw another reviewer point this out too. They went into this a little bit on the thing, but because like I said, they kind of talked about a lot of the shit that was going on like in the culture at the time, and they were talking about how when the killings were kind of at their height, the cops were trying to like impose a curfew on women. And, like, women were like, surely it would be better to impose a curfew on men since it's a man that's doing the shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, we're not killing people. It's like, why can't we walk around?
How did they catch him? He was in a car with some black chick. Wasn't she black? Wasn't the black chick?
Yeah. She was a prostitute. He had picked her up.
Yeah, and he was gonna kill her.
Yeah, because he had all his stuff.
The cops drove by and they saw him in the car together.
Like in a weird spot that was like, I guess, was
getting ready to fucking, She probably thought she was going to give some head, but he was going to fucking kill her. And they saw that car and realized that license plate didn't belong on that car.
Well, yeah, they're like, oh, there's the dude with the prostitute. So they kind of like, I don't know if they pulled him over or they just saw him like over where he wasn't supposed to be. So they ran the plate and the car didn't match.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, one of the cops noticed that the driver was Peter Sutcliffe, looked like the drawing
looked
that
like
they
the
had.
Drawing.
Because they
looked like, yeah.
Yeah, at this point, and actually, if you see the photo fit that they did of him, it's very, very good. Yeah. And that was like one woman, because I think one woman got attacked and she lived, but her head injury was so bad that she couldn't remember. Like, she didn't remember anything from like after leaving the pub. Like, she didn't remember anything else. But another woman that was attacked and lived did remember exactly what he looked like. And there's another thing too, is that she told the cops that he was a local. She said he had a Yorkshire accent because he talked to her, and they were still going with the fucking tape. Yeah. With like a dude with a different accent.
I never did tell them how they caught him though.
Yeah.
So they saw the license plate, and they ended up approaching the car and talking to him. They pulled him out of the car, pulled her out of the car, and I guess they searched the car. He had a hammer in there and a knife.
Well, no, it wasn't in the car. I said earlier.
He had it hidden in a place there, right?
Well, what he did, he got out of the car and they were questioning him, right? Yeah. And then he was like, oh, hey, I gotta pee. And they let him run around the corner, like behind this wall, and he dumped a knife and a hammer over there.
Well, he just said yes.
But then he got back in the car and shit like that. But then later, the cop that said, man, that guy looked a lot like...
They found that knife and hammer.
He went back there, like, a little bit later, like, after the car left, and he went back there and found the hammer.
So
then they arrested him.
He did have a knife and a hammer. I just didn't realize it
he just kind of had it on him, and then, like, he just went and dumped it, and then, like, took off.
Right, so they put it all together, and they said, that's him. Well, shit, man. Had he said nothing and gotten a lawyer and fucking, he could have said, I don't know, I saw that there when I was taking a piss. Fucking, and then the lawyer would have said, yeah, that's a common place to go stash and to do the hooker transactions. And that's a common place to do the fucking hooker action, and that's somewhere deep in the cut. So yeah, the killer was there, but this isn't him. That's what they would have done. It'd be hard to get a conviction, but he spilled his guts. He wanted to get caught.
He must have. Yeah. Because I feel like they really were not close to catching him. Like I said, they interviewed him 9 times, but they had like fuck tons of suspects. Yeah. Like a lot of people had been interviewed like a lot of times. So I feel like he wasn't really, I don't think he was afraid of getting caught. Maybe it had just been 5 years and he was kind of sick of it, or he was like, I don't know.
Had some pangs of guilt or something. There's no telling. But girl got lucky, man. She almost fucking got waxed.
Yeah, they interviewed her a little bit, like from the time period, and
yeah, and he wasn't killing prostitutes per se.
It was anybody.
It was any woman that he had that he could get his hands on. You know what I mean? It was all targets of opportunity.
Yeah,
it didn't have anything to do with
and like I said, I think that's kind of why, because the first 2 victims, like I said, I'm not even sure of the first 2 women that were killed. I'm not really sure if they were certain that they were prostitutes or not. They just assumed that they were because they were out late at night, walking around by themselves or whatever. So, whether they had been working as a prostitute or something, I'm not sure if they had like confirmation of that. But whatever the case, they assumed that at least the first 2 victims were prostitutes. So then they said, oh, well, we're after a prostitute killer. And like I said, that also gave people like women that weren't prostitutes, that kind of maybe made them feel safer, because it's like, well, I'm not a hooker, so I'm not going to get killed. But then like I think it was the 4th or 5th victim was just like a 16-year-old girl that was just like walking home from like a party or like her job or some shit like that. And after that, I think they finally realized that. And then one woman got killed like in her flat. Yeah. Like, she wasn't even in the street. Like, you know what I mean? So I kind of feel like it was just, some of them might have been prostitutes, but I feel like it was just like, if there was a woman walking around by herself and there was nobody else around, he'd be like, ooh, score. And he would just go, he didn't give a shit if she was a prostitute. Well, what, he's going to check? No. Yeah. And like I said, he was just running up behind him and hitting him with a hammer. That's what he was doing. Yeah,
Zen Maverick's in there talking about, he's arguing with people about where the military are and police. And what you're saying, Maverick, the idea that military guys like fucking Rangers and SEALs are protectors, that's new military philosophy. That came out in recent decades. You go back to the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, no, that's not the way it was. No. Depends on which generation of soldier you're talking about. In my generation, it was all Cold War stuff, and we were being trained to fight World War III, which was going to be cross between nuclear combat in an apocalyptic fucking war in Europe or something like Vietnam. It was a combination of them both. And it had nothing to do with protection. It had to do with just like the total annihilation of an enemy country. It's exactly what it was. There was no concept of, soon as they started doing all this world government stuff and we're going to do law enforcement on other countries, first time I saw that was Operation Just Cause. My unit wasn't selected because we told them, no, they shoot at us from windows, we're going to fucking blow the whole fucking, we're going to already strike the entire fucking building and bring them all down together. And they were like, well, what about the civilians in there? And we were like, well, fuck them. Because they're all related. If you shoot an enemy combatant, the civilian next to him is a cousin. A few weeks later, they all turn against you anyway. That's exactly what happened in Mogadishu. So it was just depends on how you look at it. There were different generations that thought different ways. I don't believe in going to war with any other country unless you're willing to just wipe them out. If you're not willing to wipe them out, don't go to war with them. Because that's eventually what happens. All this shit's going on in Afghanistan and all this bullshit in the Middle East the past 20 years. It's just law enforcement, if you ask me. And it has nothing to do with improving the American situation or the global situation. It has everything to do with rich people making shit tons of money, and those fuckers don't even live here. They live offshore. So no, I don't believe in any of that. They've totally changed the fucking culture to adapt to that. So the infantry soldiers of today, to me, they just look like cops to me. They're not even carrying 7 magazines. They don't even know how to set camp. Most of them are mechanized. It's okay, man. That's all I'm gonna talk about. I survived. I was doing LRSD type shit, long range fucking patrols and recon platoons, where you're out for fucking 35, 40 days. You never come back. You're just living out in the woods. Some of it's fucking Arctic, up in Korea and shit. But nah, it's just now these bitches live in hotels. It's just a totally different scene now. And if you're an ex-ranger or an ex-SEAL and you're on a police force, you're fucking yourself. Why would you do that? You're not going to make hardly any money. There's all kinds of private contracting companies they can go to and make $150,000 a year. So it's just not worth it to be a cop, if you ask me. All right, go ahead. Not with a jacket like that. You got a badass DD-214. You were in special operations. The special operations during my time, that was fucking impossible to get that. They didn't want any more guys. Now they just create them endlessly. I see these guys on damn YouTube, ex-fucking 5th group and 7th group special forces. I'm looking at them and I go, man, that's special forces? Just looks like a regular Joe. They didn't really look like regular dudes when I was in. You know, it was damn near impossible to get into those units. You had to be the fucking cream of the crop, and there weren't very many of them. And they were lifers. They were in for fucking 20-something years. And when they got out, they got huge contracts with security companies. They never were civilian. They, you know, when they got out, they just stayed doing that kind of shit. All right. That's all I'm gonna talk about.
I don't know. You said that 3 times already, and then I opened my mouth, and then you just kept talking anyway. So it's like, that's why I just leave a big gap, because I'm like, I know that's not all he's going to talk about. The minute I open my mouth, he's going to start talking again. But yeah, so like I said, this is on Netflix, at least in the US. I assume it is in the UK as well. But yeah, it's like actually really interesting. Like,
they asked me if I realized there was a racket when I was in. It wasn't a racket when I was in. It was very different. It was during a time of transition. Now it's a fucking blatant racket. but it's just gotten worse. It's just degenerated. Fucking. I thought Gulf War One was kind of, what is this? Why, why did we actually do it that way? We got to take this dude out because we're just going to be back here later, and that's exactly what happened. It was about fucking money, but they kind of said it was about money, so it wasn't that much of a deception. I definitely knew Mogadishu was fucking bullshit. That was just, we had no business going in there. Operation Restore Hope, no, that was bullshit. And it just progressively got worse and worse and worse. And if you ask me, it's a sign of a dying empire. Fucking, the Union's time is limited, and it was because they were doing shit like that. All right.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm sure now. I'm getting out. Yeah.
But yeah, I was gonna say this was actually really interesting because, like I said, even though I knew a lot about the case, I like that it provided so much of the social context. I like that they did it actually in a chronological fashion, so you could actually follow the investigation like sort of in real time, rather than them just saying, "Oh, this is Peter Sutcliffe. This is the guy that did it." Blah blah blah, talking about his past, and then they go back and talk about it. I like that they did it like as though you were living through it in the time period. You know what I mean? Just over like a 4-hour time. So I thought that was like really cool. And like I said, they came up with, even though I knew a lot about the case, they came up with a bunch of like little details and shit that I didn't know about. Like I liked seeing all the archival footage, and I can't remember when we did the show about this. I can't remember if we even knew this because I don't remember ever reading this anywhere before, but I didn't know about those 3 women that got attacked before William McCann got killed. And had gotten hit in the head with a hammer, like in that same area, and had lived and had reported to the cops, and they didn't really do anything about it. So that was like new information to me also. But yeah, so this is definitely, if you're into true crime, it's definitely worth watching. I also like too that, because you know how I'm not shitting on like all American true crime documentaries, because a lot of them are really good, but I think a lot of them, it kind of suffers from like the Gordon Ramsay syndrome, where it's like the British version of Hell's Kitchen, or not Hell's Kitchen, but Kitchen Nightmares is like way better because it's like way more in depth. It's like a lot more chill. Whereas the American one, as much as I love it, is all just kind of like yelling and, just dramatic editing and shit like that. So I like that this had that. This had like a more British, like chilled out. It wasn't all like dun 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 and like with people screaming and shit like that. So I thought that was refreshing.
Yeah. All right, they're asking me about Vietnam. Yes, Vietnam was another clusterfuck. All right, it was part of the fucking ramifications of World War II. The problems all started in World War II. It was when generals realized that warfare was won by mass production. It really didn't matter. Generalship didn't matter that much if you had unlimited production capabilities. So the general staff officers started to realize that the best way to win a war was to have a lot of corporate allies and huge corporations. So they started to mimic corporations. And the United States Army went from something kind of like a Napoleonic order of dudes who played fucking kind of like these little games on boards with little fucking lead figurines and shit, and how to be a general. They went from that to fucking being like a corporate entity. So by the time the 50s had rolled around, it was just corporate as shit. And corporations like to make profit, and they organized it in a way to where if you were at war, the machine made money. People got promoted. They won medals. They ended up making enough money to fucking buy houses. They actually would have mansions built on post, and you had generals fucking assigned to damn mansions. It was fucking ridiculous. So they got involved in a fucking civil war between Vietnamese, the North and the South Vietnamese. And they told the public it was trying to stop communist expansion, which is fucking ridiculous because, what was his name? Fucking, shit. What was that fucker's name? Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh had asked the United States for fucking support, material support, before we ever got into the war. And they were trying to get France out of there. But France did leave, and we kind of took France's place. and Ho Chi Minh sided with the communists. All right, even though there wasn't really anything communist about the Ho Chi Minh other than their damn uniforms. They hated the Chinese. We thought that there was going to be like a domino effect. None of that shit happened. Really, what that war was about rice farming. Really, what it was about. You had a ruling class in Vietnam that was very corrupt. They owned all the land, and they had the rice farmers working on the land and were charging them exorbitant amounts of money. We got involved in there. They were rebelling against that. They ended up getting communist backing. We went in there to stop the communist backing, but the next thing you know, the Republic of fucking South Vietnam is using the U.S. Army to kind of conduct a genocidal war against the Vietnamese to help them run a racket behind rice farming and fucking land ownership. It was just a clusterfuck. And the big corporations, of course, got good government contracts behind it. They made a lot of money. And they were fucking developing airborne warfare with fucking choppers. They were using it like an experiment. It wasn't really a war. No war was ever declared. It was just a police action. See, that's the fucking problem. Getting all these little police actions. And just the way it was set up, there was no way you'd ever win it. It would just be a forever war. But that's what you have now. These forever wars. And man, they got all that shit's got to stop. Now, Gulf War One, and I joined during that time. It wasn't a forever war. They stopped it, you know. But that Bush won. I believe he knew he was going to have to get back in there, which that eventually did happen. That 9/11 thing went down, and a lot of people say that might have been a setup. I don't know. I don't have any evidence, but. All this shit is a sign. World War II fucked up World War II fucked America up permanently. All right. Everything is the repercussions of that. That war never really ended. It just simmered forever. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Our destiny is to break up just like the Soviet Union. Because we needed the Soviet Union to hold all this shit together. We would have had, and it's just, the timing's bad. Yeah. And, yeah, I ain't buying it no more. I ain't buying it no more.
You done? You sure?
Yeah. Okay. The future is going to be non-state actors dissolving empires and breakaway republics. That's the future. Okay.
You sure?
I'm sure. Also, corporate warfare. Corporations will fight each other.
He does it every single time.
You might have nation states declaring asymmetric warfare against corporations, and corporations conducting war against each other, even though it's not really war as you know it. It's just a bunch of fucking sabotage. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say.
No, I'm sure it's not.
Okay.
But okay,
I'm gonna let it go.
I mean, you realize that we're at 48 minutes.
Good.
He's getting all ranty. All right, so we'll be back tomorrow to do another matinee. I'll find something entertaining to watch tonight that we can talk about with you guys, and hopefully you enjoyed our bizarre discussion, sort of mostly about the Yorkshire Ripper, but then about other things too. So we'll see you guys again tomorrow. Bye.